One call that you will eventually get as a private investigator, and repeatedly probably, are from people who have been victims of vandalism calling you to ask about surveillance. Hi, I'm Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com and the creator of the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series, which is premium private investigator training from someone who's been there and done that. So here's the scenario, here's the case you're going to get. Someone's car was vandalized overnight, or some spray painting on the house, or something like that. Maybe even an industrial thing where a company calls you, but frequently this will be from a private individual, private citizen who's been a victim, and they're concerned now. The vandal has gotten in their head, which is probably what the vandal wanted to begin with. So typically you might have a girl's car is vandalized, and her father, she lives at home still, maybe a high school student, a father will call you and ask, you know, this is what's happened, is there anything you can do for me? And specifically, should I or can I get someone out to do covert surveillance for me overnight tonight in case they come back? Here's the tricky thing. Are they going to come back or not? There's no good answer to this, and if I were you, and I never do, if someone calls me with this question, I never tell them yes or no, do it or don't do it. Here's what you have to wrestle with. 99.9% of the time, they will not come back, especially not that very next night. Okay, this is the type of thing that it just does not happen that often. It does happen sometimes, so you don't want to tell your client or potential client, no, don't worry about it, this rarely happens, and then have them come back the next night, because they'll end up blaming you. So here's what you wrestle with. Do you or don't you do this surveillance? Do you or don't you encourage them to take that, let's face it, quite an expense? Because frequently they don't know when the vandalism happened. They know they went, you know, they didn't see the car from 8 o'clock at night until 8 o'clock the next morning when they went to get into it. There's a 12-hour period. You know, 12 hours of surveillance is really expensive and probably worth it in a lot of cases. Maybe not a vandalism case where you've got, say, $1,200 worth of damage and a deductible for your insurance company. Financially, it probably does not make sense to do surveillance. But from a peace of mind, people are really worried about this type of thing. And you can imagine if it happened to you, if it happened to someone you love, you would want to do whatever you could to try to resolve it and catch whoever did it. The best suggestion I have most of the time is a surveillance camera, a system. And, you know, so now you've got to talk about what's your budget, how much money do you have, how much money do you want to put into it. And here's a camera system is going to serve you much better rather than having someone out there doing surveillance. So if you are a private investigator, you get this call, maybe you want to be in a position where you can say to them, camera systems, what you suggest. Maybe you have one that you want to sell them, or one you can suggest to them. A very difficult thing with these types of cases is video at night is rough. It is just rough to get good video at night with the low light conditions. You'll run into this especially with a camera system. Without this human being doing surveillance to adjust the camera to work with things like focus and exposure, you're going to get even worse video using a fixed camera system than you would with an investigator. But again, you're balancing cost here, right? So what's going to happen, even if you do go out as an investigator and in the unlikely event something happens, you're going to have very poor footage of what happened. So now you're relying very much on the investigator seeing what's going on, probably calling the police, getting the person caught that way. Again, very difficult, very tricky. If you think, where does a vandalism call fall in the order of police runs, even a vandalism in progress? Getting an officer out there before the vandalism is done and before the person gets away, even if you intend to follow them, that's tricky. And if you do intend to follow them, you know, that's a whole nother can of worms. I talk about that kind of thing in my book, How to Make a Citizen's Arrest. Following people can be very tricky and wrought with all sorts of hazards. So, you know, my thing to people is probably having an investigator out there the next day is not the right answer. The odds of them coming back are pretty slim. There are two exceptions now. One is that disgruntled ex-boyfriend. Now, this guy is not going to probably come back 2 nights in a row. Probably not even again recently, but you know, who knows, 6 months from now, he gets drunk, he starts thinking about her, comes back and just randomly, over a period of a year, 18 months, 2 years, you'll find this random vandalism. That's a problem. Again, I go back to security cameras for that type of thing to help solve that problem. Now here's the big exception, and I'm going to give you where having surveillance may be worthwhile and may be something to pay off. I'm going to lump this into a general category and narrow it down, but the general category I'm going to say is something along the lines of hate crimes. So if someone has spray painted a racial slur on the side of a car or on a house, that's the type of thing where, again, probably not that very next night, but maybe within the next week or so, you might find a repeat of that vandalism. Still kind of a long shot, but that's where I kind of observe and see this thing happening over and over again. Now, take into consideration what we call observational bias. This is not a scientific study on my part. It's just where I kind of notice the repeat offenses of vandalism. Very specifically, if I can really narrow down into it now, is cemetery vandalism. That's the type of thing where I see the vandals coming back again later that week, or maybe even a couple or a few times within a 30-day period. And I put that into kind of the hate crimes category, again, because of my observational bias. This happens in cemeteries all the time, but I see it in Jewish cemeteries, so there's kind of that anti-Semitic overtone to it, or maybe it's quite blatant. But those crimes, those vandalisms, I do see repeated use, the perpetrator returning to commit the crime again. Again, a lot of times you're talking budget, whether it's worthwhile or not to have surveillance or not. So it's something you have to talk about with your client. But there's my experience. If you don't have a lot of experience in there, I hope this helps you form in your mind the answers, the things you're going to think about, and maybe turn you on to pay attention to these things when they're in the news and when other agencies that you talk with, other investigators, have cases like this. It's just make you a better investigator, better able to serve your client, which is really what it's all about. This is Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.